I vividly remember being in my secondary school library one day, trying to find a new section for comic books that had been set up, only to stumble across a copy of a book with Sonic the Hedgehog on the cover instead. And, being a massive fan of the Blue Blur, my immediate reaction was, why does he look like he's about to shit himself? This was my introduction to the short-lived series of Sonic novels published by Virgin Books, consisting of 4 titles that were released from September 1993 to January 1994. They were all written by Martin Adams, a professional English darts player and existential psychotherapist. Except they weren't, because those are 2 different people, and the Martin Adams in question doesn't exist. In reality, the stories were written by British tabletop role-playing game designers James Wallace and Carl Sargent, while freelance editor Mark Gascoigne ensured that all 4 were consistent with one another. The trio used Martin Adams as a pseudonym, so that their work would be placed on shelves in bookstores and libraries at eye level, making them what people browsing would see first. The novels themselves closely follow the backstories for Sonic and Robotnik that were laid out in the Sonic Bible by Sega of America, and their subsequent adaptations in the Stay Sonic Guidebook and Fleetway's Sonic the Comic. If you're not familiar, the TLDR is this. Sonic meets a bloke called Dr. Kinterbor, he goes really fast and turns blue, Kinterbor puts the wrong thing into a machine, gets blown up, and transforms into the evil Dr. Robotnik, thus leading directly into the first 2 Sonic games. Despite this shared origin though, the books aren't connected to Sonic the Comic at all, and are somehow even more batshit crazy than STC ever was. I'm going to give you a brief overview of all 4 stories so you can understand what I mean, as well as offer my thoughts on them, and some neat bits of trivia that only massive nerds like myself would give a shit about, starting with the first entry in the series, Sonic the Hedgehog in Robotnik's Laboratory, by Carl Sargent. Having just gotten back from a holiday, Sonic and Tails decide to prank their friend Porker Lewis by chucking a custard pie at him, only to discover that he and all of their friends in Green Hill Zone have disappeared. They deduce that they must have been kidnapped by Robotnik, thanks to Tux the Penguin's door having the word help written in fridge magnet letters, and after spotting an Eggomatic in the distance, they head out to save their friends. After meeting some interesting characters to say the least, such as King Peter the King Prawn, the awful singer Stevie the Mole, and for some reason Julius Caesar and the Romans who just exist in this universe I guess, Sonic gets turned into a fucking toaster. It turns out that Robotnik's plan is to transform everybody that poses a threat to him into ordinary household objects, and he captured the likes of Porker, Johnny Lightfoot and Sally Acorn to test the process out before using it against Sonic. He soon turned back to normal however, and with help from Sally, as well as the elderly out-of-touch Mickey the Monkey, and Kevin, a red squirrel who had been transformed into Robotnik's faithful lab assistant, Egor, Sonic is able to save his friends, undo their transformations, and destroy the laboratory. It's a decent enough read in my opinion, but good god, prepare to have a dictionary filled with 80s and 90s slang flung right at you. If Carl Sargent isn't describing the totally bodacious trick about to be sprung, he'll chuck in character dialogue like, "Thank you for that radically cool helpfulness," or "Cowabunga hero type dudes, I feel a song coming on." It is so unbearably how do you do fellow kids that I can't help but love it. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the humour, which is ripe with puns, fourth wall breaking, and food, strangely enough. The first page explains that Sonic needs to eat a ton of food in order to keep his energy and metabolism going, so I guess that's why. It's also worth noting that his, Tails, and the other supporting cast members from Sonic the Comic have drastically different personalities here. Sonic isn't a massive dick for one, and treats Tails like his equal, frequently praising him for his help. Porker is much more confident and sure of himself than in STC, while remaining an expert in technology, whereas Johnny is given some attitude, something I appreciate as I always found him to be the least developed of the lead characters from the comic. The next installment in the range was Sonic the Hedgehog in the Fourth Dimension by James Wallace, which follows Sonic and Tails as they travel across time and space to undo Robotnik's attempts to alter history. These changes include the Green Hill Zone being replaced by the muddy, rainy and heavily polluted Brown Hill Zone, Porker Lewis vanishing out of existence, the sudden appearance of Carrie the Koipu who claims to be Tails' fiancé, and a supposed new hero called Eric the Echidna, who kicks Sonic straight into a portal that leads to the Fourth Dimension. It's here that Sonic reunites with Tails, and the two meet a group of human scientists called the Organizers, who are tasked with maintaining the laws of space and time, in addition to eliminating the Mythos creatures, a race of evil mythological beings that want to exist in reality. They agree to work together, and are able to come up with a plan that will not only end Robotnik's time meddling, but also prevent him from ever existing, as both Sonic and Tails will go back to the past, and avert the fateful explosion that originally transformed the kind-hearted Kinterbor. Initially, the plan succeeds, until Mythos creatures arrive on Mobius and steal the Chaos Emeralds from Kinterbor's lab. Sonic and Tails are able to use their speed to pursue them all the way back to the Big Bang, where they learn that Arcta, the Mythos leader, has launched the Emeralds directly into the impending explosion, which will lead to the Organizers and the Fourth Dimension being erased from existence. Sonic determines that the only way to stop this and revert the timeline to how it should be is, tragically, to cause Kinterbor's transformation into Robotnik. However, him doing so also causes the Sonic of the past to be affected by the explosion, turning him into the evil Sinnoh. This final chapter gets very confusing, so I'll do my best to briefly summarise how it all ends. Sonic beats Sinnoh, he and his past selves go to the 4th dimension, Robotnik freaks the fuck out thinking that it's full of Sonics, he runs away vowing never to use time travel, then Sonic gets the organisers and the Mythos creatures to agree to coexist peacefully together in the same dimension, he and Arctor become really good friends, and finally he and Tails end up back where the adventure first began. Being a story all about time travel, the 4th dimension can be quite confusing to understand, and I don't think that my brief summary does it any justice. This is a legitimately great book that gets quite dark towards the end, which I was pretty surprised by when I first read it, so I highly recommend that you check it out for yourself. Arctor is a major highlight, as are the members of the organisers like Captain Carl, whose name is a cheeky reference to Carl Sargent. There's also a fun nod to editor Mark Gascoigne with the name of the time machine, which is the Mark Zero Gascoigne. Another fun bit of trivia for you, Eric the Echidna predates Knuckles' first appearance by about 5 months, making him the first Echidna to appear in the franchise. I've also seen a few people claim that Sinnoh is the first evil Sonic, but since Fleetway's version of Super Sonic appeared a month prior in issue 7 of STC, I'm inclined to disagree. Moving on, we have Sonic the Hedgehog and the Silicon Warriors, the 3rd book and my first exposure to this range as I discussed earlier. This one was also written by James Wallace, and begins with yet another race between Sonic and Tails, as they simultaneously patrol the various zones from their past adventures. They soon discover that all of their friends have once again disappeared, stumbling across an old computer monitor belonging to Kinterbor. Curiosity gets the better of Tails, and he presses a button on the keyboard, causing him to get absorbed and trapped inside the computer. Determined to save his friend, Sonic rushes off to find some way of getting him out, encountering Iggy the White Mouse along the way. Tails, meanwhile, finds out that nearly the entire population of Mobius has been trapped inside the computers along with him, and manages to free them all and himself after fending off against an onslaught of digital badniks. All is not well, however, as Johnny Lightsfoot starts acting like a certain plumber with, quote, a stupido hat and daft-looking blue overalls, and a bigger bushy moustache who says daft things in a silly fake accent, unquote. I wonder what that's referencing. Iggy determines that he, and everybody else, has been infected with a computer virus that will gradually turn them into video game characters, leaving the population no choice but to return back to the computers while Sonic sets out to find Robotnik. Following a brief encounter with his archenemy, and having to fight a knockoff of Street Fighter's Chun-Li, Sonic ends up inside the computer world himself along with Robotnik, who reveals that the cure for the virus is hidden somewhere deep in the system. During his search for it, he meets the ghost of all the data erased from computers called Psyche, and his video game counterpart from the Mega Drive, who he quickly teams up with. Eventually, they find the cure, as well as Robotnik's crucial files, which they quickly delete, saving everybody on Mobius in the process. The Silicon Warriors is probably my favourite out of all 4 books. It's a fun, light-hearted romp that I have a lot of nostalgia for, as I used to read it on rainy days in my school's library. My only gripe with it is that there are some really weird fourth wall breaks that take me out of the story whenever I come to them, like this one. Aren't we video game characters? Asked Tails, who had joined them by the ailing rabbit. Well, normally yes, Sonic agreed, but at the moment, we're characters in a book. This implies that both Sonic and Tails are self-aware, and know full well they're fictional characters from both a game and a book. So how did they find out about this? Did they have an existential crisis upon learning the truth? Are these lines of dialogue subtle pleas for help to free them from their paper prison? I'm going to stop myself right here before I question this any further, and move on to the final book in the series, Sonic the Hedgehog in Castle Robotnik by Carl Sargent. It opens with Sonic and his friends watching a horror movie about vampires, only for Porker Lewis to seemingly be bitten by a vampire on his way back home. After they deduce he hasn't been afflicted based on his enjoyment of a garlic pizza, Sonic and Tails head off to get to the bottom of what could have caused it. Robotnik, meanwhile, has recaptured Kevin the Squirrel and turned him back into his robotic servant Egor as part of his most evil plan yet, to produce and direct a feature-length horror film called Castle Robotnik, with himself as the lead. Sonic and Tails become aware of this when they meet a werewolf who's been cast in the project, and follow his directions to the set, only to find themselves trapped inside. They both come to the realization that they're being used as unwilling actors in Robotnik's film, with the cameras filming their run-ins with numerous parodies of movie monsters, such as the Count, a vampire walrus, and Ferdy, a scarred penguin with knives on his flippers. One by one, Sonic and Tails are able to defeat them and progress throughout the castle, until they're opposed by Frankensonic, a 65-foot-tall amalgamation of Sonic and Frankenstein, which Robotnik plans to use to attack Green Hill Zone in the climax of his film. Fortunately, they're able to destroy it and the castle itself, which somehow conveniently cures Porker. Sargent literally wrote that he knew there were only a couple of pages left to clear everything up, and I have nothing but respect for him basically admitting he'd forgotten a major plot point. Regardless though, this is easily the weakest out of all the books in my opinion. The premise is very over the top, even by Sonic standards, and the writing isn't anywhere near as strong as the previous ones. I don't really have much else to say about it beyond that, other than I appreciate the continuity links with Sargent's previous story, Robotnik's Laboratory. It's nice to see him revisit characters from that book, rather than just forgetting about them. But yeah, that about sums up the British Sonic books. If you're at all interested in the franchise's early years, and want to see how writers had drastically different interpretations of Sonic's world from what we see nowadays, then they're definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of Sonic the comic. Alright, I'm gonna go and play that Shadow Generations DLC now. I haven't had a chance yet because I've been too busy working on this. I'll see you fuckers next time, where I'll be talking about the worst character in the entire Sonic franchise.